Millions of people use dating apps such as Tinder every day, seeking romance and to have fun. Now, as expected in a world full of chaos, some of these dates go horribly wrong. But what happens if one of these so-called dates led you to the mercy of a sex-crazed cult, with the leader calling himself no other than the vampire sugar daddy? With self-made videos created while evading the law, terrifying surveillance footage, and even a cult involved, the details of this case get more and more bizarre as time goes on. But what exactly happened to Sydney Loofe, and who was responsible for her disappearance? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at the case of Sydney Loofe. If you're new here, I post solved, unsolved, and strange cases weekly. So if that's your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. So without further ado, let's begin today's video. Please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and sit back. This is the case of Sydney Loofe. A thriving music scene, vast open prairies, spacious farmlands, and some very unique attractions. Of course, I'm referring to the state of Nebraska. Welcome to Cornhusker State, folks. Nebraska was once considered part of the Great American Desert, but through many decades, it has since transformed into a leading agricultural state. Many modern-day films depict Nebraska as an area of never-ending cornfields. And yeah, that's pretty accurate. According to Crop Watch, over 1.8 billion bushels of corn were produced in Nebraska in 2021. Putting this into more understandable context, that's around 2.3 billion square feet. And in another sense, this means Nebraska's annual volume of corn could fill London's Wembley Stadium 13 times over. That's quite an amazing fact, if you understand me. If corn and corny puns aren't enough for you, Nebraska is also known as the origin of the Reuben sandwich and Kool-Aid. Both of these things would be gladly accepted upon my table. Sydney Irene Loofe was born on August 21st, 1993, to her mother Susie and father George. And after being born in Broken Bow, she moved to several other Nebraskan towns throughout her childhood. Sydney otherwise had a relatively normal childhood, full of life and love for the outdoors. She was into several sports, including golf, basketball, and pole fishing. Now, unfortunately, while attending Nellie Oakdale High School, she was diagnosed with scoliosis, a condition that affects the curvature of one's spine. And as a result, she had to drop most of her hobbies. However, fishing out on the lake during the weekends would resume. Sydney also loved animals, and she put a lot of care into looking after her own cat, Mimsy. Moving into her adulthood and graduating from high school in 2011, Sydney began to work at a local Menards store as a store clerk, which specialises in home improvement. Now, as I am sure a lot of us can relate, Sydney wasn't too sure what she wanted to do with a future career. Menards was fine for now, but it didn't quite stream employment goals. This, amongst life's other 100 problems, would unfortunately leave her in a somewhat depressed state, and by November of 2017, her mental health had worsened. But thankfully, Sydney had an amazingly supportive network. Not only were her family there to work through her issues, but her friends and colleagues such as Brooklyn McChrystal were willing to help. But in addition to her depression, Sydney also felt heartache, and with no one to hold close, her life didn't feel whole. Sydney was also romantically attracted to other women, and living in the middle of Nebraska, it made it very difficult for her to find another woman to love. With this in mind, she turned to the world of Tinder to find new connections. As most of you know, Tinder is an app that allows you to meet, hook up, and fall in love with other people. It was in the early half of November 2017 that Sydney swiped right to a woman named Audrey. Audrey approved her back, and with a mutual approval, the two started conversing. Most messages shared their interests and hobbies, and about the possibility of meeting up for a quick bake before going out for steak and gambling. And around 100 messages later, the two agreed to put their plans into motion. On November 14th, 2017, and after asking Audrey if their date would exclusively be the two of them, Sydney made her way to her flat located in Wilbur, Nebraska. It turns out that their date went surprisingly well. And although not much is known on what happened that evening, it was good enough for Audrey to ask Sydney out on another date. Sydney accepted the offer, and the two made plans to meet up the following evening, again in Audrey's home. But with work scheduled the following day, Sydney would have to get through her shift first before embarking on any other plans. At 6 PM on November the 15th, a surveillance camera captured Sydney Loofe leaving Menards towards her own vehicle. Around half an hour later, she had returned home. Sydney then posted to her friends on Snapchat saying, "Ready for my date." And just after she had posted this, Audrey had pulled up outside of her home and messaged her on Tinder. Sydney read the message, put on her shoes, and left her home to join Audrey in the car. And after they got acquainted, the two then drove away into the winter's evening. The following morning, as the dawn cast itself over the homes and fields of Nebraska, a distinct chill captured the air. It was a Thursday, and most of those in Lincoln were preparing for another usual workday. But those at Menards were faced with a rather unusual predicament. Their sales clerk, Sydney Loofe, had failed to check in for her shift, thus leaving the team down a member. Calling her mobile phone yielded no positive results, as their calls went straight through to voicemail, and shortly after this, concerned colleagues notified her parents. But doing this would do nothing but cause further worry, as they too hadn't heard from her since the evening before. With the sudden realization that Sydney had not been accounted for since 7 PM the night prior, her mother immediately sensed that something was off. And so, in the afternoon of November the 16th, Sydney Loofe was reported to police as missing. By the following morning, officers were ready to conduct a welfare check on her rented property. They were met with her SUV still on the driveway, and what they found inside was further brooding. Officers found her purse and her glasses inside her home, which indicated it was likely she did not mean to leave. To add to this, her cat had not been fed, which was extremely out of character for Sydney. Sydney's family were beside themselves. It is easy for an outsider to rationalise why a stranger may have gone AWOL, but for those who really knew Sydney, this was agonisingly unusual. Unknown to everyone else at the time, but suspicion was growing over at Audrey's apartment too. The landlord, who lived above, had complained of a strong smell of bleach coming from the basement. In fact, it was so bad that one of the family members living above had started throwing up and reacting with hives. And to add to this, it was rather odd that the air conditioner was on in the middle of November. Within 2 days, officers were able to confirm that Sydney's phone had last pinged at a cell tower close to Audrey's home too. However, in this moment of time, they had no idea who she was. Authorities were very keen to try and find this so-called Audrey, as it was very likely that she was the last person to have seen Sydney before her sudden disappearance. They just didn't know how to find her, because nobody knew who she was. So, this is where an unexpected detective enters the scene, as it would be Sydney's good friend Brooklyn who helped solve the missing piece of the puzzle. Brooklyn decided she would try and find Audrey all by herself. She downloaded Tinder, replicated the same info that Sydney had, and went on the hunt. Eventually finding Audrey, she swiped right, and what would you know, Audrey swiped right back. After connecting, they exchanged numbers for a date. And as soon as Audrey sent her number to Brooklyn, Brooklyn gave this number to authorities. Finally, they had a number to work with.
This photo, posted on Snapchat Wednesday, was the last time anyone heard from 24-year-old Sydney Loofe. Lincoln police confirm investigators have spoken to the woman Loofe was planning to meet, but no other details. Tara Gehring, a co-worker from Menards, says they let Loofe's family know when she didn't show up to work Thursday. Loofe's parents, George and Susie, tell us officers checked their daughter's place in Lincoln and that her SUV is still parked in the front. Investigators say they got leads that Loofe may have been in Wilbur, Nebraska since her disappearance. Loofe's friends all over Nebraska are helping spread the word via flyers and social media. Loved ones also sharing photos of Loofe's tattoos, anything to get her home.
With Audrey's mobile phone number, authorities were now able to backtrack on this information. And it turns out that Audrey was not actually her real name. The woman who had dated Sydney was actually named Bailey Boswell. To add to this, her apartment, which reeked of bleach, was within range of the last cell tower Sydney's phone had pinged. Furthermore, this apartment was jointly rented with her actual partner, Aubrey Trail. The fake Tinder name used was a twisted play on the man's name. So, who exactly are Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail? Beginning this question with Bailey, she grew up in Leon in the state of Iowa. Bailey was supposedly a popular and friendly kid in a well-mannered family. And to add to this, she stood out at school as a gifted athlete, was talented in basketball, and was one of the fastest runners in her state. However, there is a dark side to her childhood too. Unfortunately, Bailey's father was murdered when she was a very young age, and after graduating from high school, she made the wrong turn in her life. Bailey began to hang out with the wrong crowds, steered towards frequent drug abuse, and all in all made poor decisions. Eventually, Bailey met Aubrey through Backpage, which is an online advertising website for sex work. She was looking for, quote, a sugar daddy in the local area. And through the following months, she inherited many of Aubrey's awful traits and behaviours. I say this because Aubrey is a real piece of work. Dating as far back as 1999, he has a long career of fraud, theft, and trafficking violations. One of Aubrey's main ways to swindle money was to write fraudulent checks to vulnerable antique shops, where he would then pawn these stolen items to the next one. Aubrey was manipulative in his sexual relationships too. He used cult-like tactics on women to fit them into his tightly controlled lifestyle. And I say cult-like because he was actually the leader of a cult. He saw himself as the sugar daddy vampire, and all of his women were referred to as his witches. He paid all of these witches $200 a week, so long as they followed his set of rules. Some of these rules included contacting him every 3 hours, not talking to other men, and calling him daddy. Now don't get me wrong, these rules were terrible, especially the last one, but technically none of them necessarily harmed anyone. However, in the recent months of 2017, some of these newly recruited women were faced with a rule they simply could not accept. To become a witch, they would have to breathe in someone's last breath, meaning they would have to kill someone in order to qualify. Catching back up with our current story, at the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey were under court order to pay over $400,000 for conducting fraud in Kansas. They had a multitude of other petty crime charges too, but instead of paying them, they were on the run to avoid these payments. Officers were now able to connect Bailey and Aubrey to Sydney Loofe, and although they had an idea of where to look for them, it was sadly too little too late. Although they had successfully obtained a search warrant on November the 19th, which was 4 days after the evening of Sydney's disappearance, they knocked at the door to find a silent apartment. Investigating the property, it appeared as if portions of several walls had been wiped down with bleach in an effort to clean them. And the landlord upstairs again highlighted that they could smell a strong odour of bleach coming from the basement in the days prior. Although officers actively began looking for Aubrey and Bailey, they had left without a trace, and in addition to this, it would take some time for their apartment to be thoroughly analysed. But what they learned of the couple over the following days was concerning at best. To begin with was their disturbing backstory, and then, days later, came the surveillance footage. Our footage begins on November the 14th, the day of Sydney's first date. At 5:08 PM, Aubrey and Bailey checked in to a hotel near Lincoln. This hotel not too far from Sydney's place of work. The following day at 10:25 AM, which was several hours before Sydney's second date with Bailey, a surveillance camera captured Aubrey and Bailey walking into a Home Depot in Lincoln. While here, they purchased a 12-inch hacksaw, 2 gallons of Clorox bleach, a folding tree saw, 30-gallon plastic trash bags, and a razor-sharp utility knife with replacement blades. Around 1 hour after leaving Home Depot, Aubrey then headed next door to Menards, where Sydney Loofe was currently working. In fact, just as he enters the shop, he accidentally crosses paths with her. Sydney did not notice or realise this, because at the time, she had no idea who he was. While here, he bought some bleach and then left the shop 20 minutes later. Another moment of coincidence, but just as Sydney re-enters the shop, the same camera spots Aubrey walking from across the car park. And at 12:41, another surveillance camera captured both Aubrey and Bailey at the Aardvark Antique Mall, where they purchased food grinders, a weed cutter, and a folding saw. As Sydney's disappearance hit the 10-day mark, her family and friends were growing further concerned, and the longer this dragged out, the more likely something was seriously wrong. With most of the investigation kept under wraps, there was a lot of speculation around Sydney and her Tinder dates. To begin with, who was Aubrey? Did she know where Sydney went? Even worse, was she responsible? On November the 28th, day 13 of Sydney's disappearance, both Aubrey and Bailey, who had vanished a week prior, were officially declared as persons of interest by authorities. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that this case gets more and more bizarre as time goes by. And here's the first reason why. Just after being publicly declared as persons of interest, both Aubrey and Bailey would suddenly reappear. But they did this in the form of a Facebook video, on a page no other than Sydney Loofe's.
Good morning, Lincoln and Omaha and probably several other places. This is Aubrey Trail and this is Bailey Boswell. I guess y'all also know her as Audrey. But we've spent the last few days watching ourselves being slammed and crucified in the newspapers and the news and everything else, so we thought it was time we had our say. The Lincoln Police Department apparently wants everyone to believe that we're hiding, that we haven't talked to them, that we're avoiding them. You've already crucified us in the newspapers. You've already crucified us on Facebook. You know, in America, I sure thought it was a trial first, but I guess not. You've heard all of this stuff about my criminal history. All true. As far as I know, I'm not wanted for anything. I'm a person of interest. And I'm not really running from anything. I pray for Sydney. I hope she's found soon. I wish the family the best. I'm sorry that she wasn't with you on Thanksgiving. And that's pretty much all I can say for now. So this has pretty much cost me my life. And I appreciate that from the Lincoln Police Department and the FBI and all those other agencies. Here's Bailey to tell you whatever she wants to.
Hi, good morning. I'm Bailey, Audrey on Tinder, and this really isn't about me. This is about Sydney. I met her on a Tuesday. We drove around Lincoln, smoked weed, had a great time. We hit it off. Picked her up the next night at her house. We drove around, smoked weed again. I went to take her home. And she asked me to drop her off at a friend's house, so, I haven't heard from her since. I guess I just want the family to know that I'm truly sorry, and I didn't have anything to do with this, and I hope that Sydney is found very soon. She is a sweet, amazing girl.
I hope also that Sydney's found soon. We wish the family the best. We're sorry you're going through this. The police department is going to do what suits them best. Yeah, I know that's coming from a criminal, so, you'll believe what you will as far as the police department is concerned. But as far as I'm concerned, what they're chasing us around like dogs, I wish the family the best. No disrespect to anyone. I wish Sydney the best. But as far as the police department, you.
Yeah.
This video backfired on them quite heavily, and after trying to publicly maintain their innocence, Aubrey went on to create another video to rant about people's comments, freedom of speech, and America.
Hi folks, Aubrey Trail here. Few little things I want to talk about. I've been watching all day. I just watched the news, that's why I'm making this. But I've been watching a lot of posts and comments today. So far today, from the comments, we have apparently murdered this lady. Just curious, are we not allowed to tell our side of this? And of course, again, I'm just a criminal, so you're going to believe none of this, and I guess it's really irrelevant because we've pretty much decided to turn ourselves in and see where this goes. If I'm a thief, I'm a thief, but I'd be goddamned, I've never killed anyone in my life. I've never hurt a female in my life. So take that for whatever the hell it's worth. I'm a crook. I'm a thief. Have been all my life. Okay? But I'm not what you're trying to make me out to be. You say we're disgusting, that you guys are pissed at us. I don't think we're the disgusting ones, because what the fuck happened to America? Trial, freedom of speech. What happened to not guilty until proven guilty? And this is what I look like. You say we're hiding. This is what? Blue eyes, teeth, brown hair. Hi. Not hiding at all. Have a nice day.
Now seriously, this guy has a serious case of verbal diarrhea, and although his video was more than 11 minutes long, there's not much more to take out of it. He did accidentally switch the video camera before turning it off though, which instead showed Bailey's underpants. However, their time on the run wouldn't last much longer after these posts, as by November the 30th, both Bailey and Aubrey were successfully tracked down by authorities. They were found in a dingy motel in Branson, Missouri. Since there was currently no evidence to charge them over Sydney's kidnapping or murder, they were instead arrested on charges related to fraud. And in their bags, officers found maps, sleeping bags, hiking shoes, and an elaborate plan to escape to Mexico. After their arrest, the two further claimed that they were innocent. But while they were getting used to their first few nights in a jail cell, the FBI were collecting their mobile phone data to better understand where they had been. They could then use this information to see where they may have hidden Sydney's body were she to be dead. And tragically, the worst of these concerns were to chime true. On Monday the 4th of December 2017, 19 days after her disappearance, parts of Sydney's body were found. By comparing the time, duration, and location of pings off nearby cell towers, investigators found that the journeys of Aubrey and Bailey's phones had stopped along a windswept corner of gravel roads found north of Edgar, Nebraska. It was about an hour's drive west of Aubrey's basement apartment, and after authorities took to the barren landscape, it only took a few minutes to find a black trash bag in a ditch. This bag was only the beginning, as over the next day, officers would find 13 parts of Sydney's body, with one part still missing to this day. Cuts on her body were consistent with a thin-bladed, fine-toothed saw, which was much like one that Aubrey and Bailey had purchased. A total of 16 crime scenes were observed, all of which either had pieces of Sydney's body or other items such as tarps, rubber gloves, sauna suits, trash bags, pajamas, and a bleached bedsheet. Whoever had killed Sydney was bent on having the evidence scattered as much as possible. Her driver's license, Visa card, and phone case were found along Highway 41, and on Highway 15, officers would find her car keys. And of course, all of these routes matched Aubrey's and Bailey's trails. And so it goes. The harrowing discovery of Sydney's body prompted a devastating reaction across all of Nebraska, and more specifically, her family and friends. On December the 11th, 2017, the Loofe family decided to hold a private funeral for Sydney at Grace Lutheran Church, a place where she had visited many times in her past. Despite the rather clear evidence that Aubrey and Bailey had something to do with Sydney's death, they still claimed their innocence for several weeks to come. But on January the 24th, almost 2 months after her discovery, cracks to their original story would finally start to form. And this is where Aubrey claimed full accountability over Sydney's death. In a phone call the very next month, he admitted that he had killed Sydney, but also that, apparently, it was entirely accidental. Over the next several months, and amongst all the other charges of fraud, Aubrey would make several confessions of varying severity. However, his stories would always differ from the last. To begin with, he claimed that he was the only one to murder Sydney, but next, he claimed that she had accidentally died during a third date with Bailey. The man then claimed that she was accidentally killed when the trio participated in a sexual fantasy. He had allegedly choked her during sex, which then accidentally killed her in the process. In a fourth confession, Aubrey went on to claim that his job was to make movies for special kinds of kinks. This is where he had paid Sydney to choke her in an adult movie, and again, he had accidentally killed her in the process.
In the process, Sydney Loofe died. There was lots of violent sex involved. There was strangulation involved. It was not supposed to go as far as it did, but it did.
Well, that means
I killed Sydney Loofe. I was so worried you would.
But you don't know what you're talking about. You don't remember why you bought things. You don't remember why you were going places.
She was laid as she was because we believe in that position, and because of what's missing from her, that she will come back quicker.
Come June 11th, 2018, both Aubrey and Bailey were charged with the first-degree murder of Sydney Loofe. And to add to this, they were also charged with the improper disposal of human remains. And with the death penalty legal in Nebraska, prosecutors confirmed that they would seek this for both perpetrators. Despite Aubrey himself claiming that there should be an eye for an eye in Sydney's death, he would actually plead not guilty, and instead wanted to give his own side of the story during his trial. Eventually, Bailey did the same thing. As Aubrey's trial began, many items from the crime scene came to light. These included handcuffs, rope, a dog collar and leash, and several sex toys. Pieces of electric wire were found near some of Sydney's remains, and multiple pieces of apparel, such as pants and gloves, were found. Several women from the so-called vampire sugar daddy cult also came forward to share their disturbing experiences with Aubrey. Ashley Hills, who was one of Aubrey's former girlfriends and cult members, testified that she had lived with Bailey and Aubrey for quite a while. She told the court that Aubrey was the ruler of a sex cult full of mentally unstable women. Aubrey called these women the witches, and Bailey was known as the Queen Witch, which essentially was his second in command. The two apparently often talked about murder, torture, and the occult, but Aubrey would stick to his guns and deny such allegations. Just before the beginning of the jury selection process, he only pleaded guilty to the improper disposal of human remains, again pleading not guilty to Sydney's murder. And what would happen next was entirely out of the blue.
Please be seated.
Bailey is innocent and I curse you all.
Stop recording.
Just as a witness was preparing to take the stand, Aubrey shouted, "Bailey is innocent and I curse you all," before he stabbed himself in the throat with a sharp object. He was then rushed to the hospital, and although he missed parts of his trial, he would go on to make a full recovery. Aubrey was stitched up and taken back into custody, and how exactly he had managed to acquire an object sharp enough to cut his own throat, it is still not fully known, but many believe it was a razor. Despite the dramatic attempt for attention, his trial would go on without him in the courtroom, and furthermore the judge asked the jury to disregard his outburst. And no surprise, but on July the 11th, 2019, the jury took less than 3 hours to make their mind up on Aubrey. He was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and improper disposal of human remains. Fast forward a little over 1 year, and Bailey too was convicted on all 3 counts in her own trial. But although her convictions were identical to Aubrey's, the two would receive different sentences. On November the 8th, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison, whereas on June the 9th, 2021, Aubrey was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The 3-judge panel served his sentence, calling his crimes cold, calculated planning. The difference in sentencing is due to the judges deciding that her actions did not meet the standard of exceptional depravity needed for capital punishment. One of the most damning pieces of evidence to this case were the letters found between Aubrey and Bailey before their trials. Although these letters were hidden in some sort of cryptic language, investigators were able to crack their Morse code, in which both of them openly admitted that they had murdered Sydney. So I guess the lesson here is, well, don't try to outsmart investigators, especially if you're missing a few tools in the box. Bailey is now an inmate at the Nebraska Correction Center for Women, located in York. And as for Aubrey Trail's trial led to the end of his trail. He is on death row at the Tecumseh State Correctional Institution. Now, I want to wrap this case up by highlighting what kind of person Sydney was. Back in 2016, when she learned that a colleague was living rough, she did something that a lot of us wouldn't do. She offered him a place to stay while he found his feet, and during this time she taught him how to cook, how to save money, and how to look after himself. When asked why she was willing to do that for a colleague she barely knew, Sydney responded with, "Everybody needs help at some point in their life, and I feel as if I can help him." And I feel that pretty much encapsulates Sydney's demeanour. She had a lot of nurture and love to give to those around her. She outwardly supported all of those who walked into her life, and Audrey was a woman she planned to love too. But sadly, both Bailey and Aubrey had entirely different plans. If you plan on using dating apps such as Tinder or otherwise, please research the best ways on keeping yourself safe, as you can never be too sure the true intentions of a stranger. And that pretty much wraps up today's case, folks. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this case interesting or you learned something new, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. This case recommendation came from Morty145, so thank you, Morty. If you guys have any other cases you'd like to recommend, please leave them in the comments below or send me an email. So what are your thoughts on this case? Do you use Tinder or any other sort of dating platform? And how do you keep yourself safe? Please share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And as always, folks, I'll be back again real soon for another video. But until that moment arrives, please remember to look after each other and stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye. Millions of people use dating apps such as Tinder every day. Hello? I'm just starting the story. Gonna come say hi? There we go. I'm gonna say hi to the camera over here. Look. Hey, over here. What's that?
The prophecy is true.